So lovely good morning to you and welcome to the Bank of Zambia radio program. My name is Clyde Shifwati, and this morning on the program I have with me Bank of Zambia Governor Dr. Denny Kalyalya. Good morning, sir. Doc, how are you this morning?
Good morning, Clyde, and good morning, listeners.
All right. How have you been holding up with this COVID-19?
Pretty well, I guess, under the circumstances. Mm-hmm. It's quite challenging to all of us. Mm-hmm. We have come to now accustomed to wearing masks, mm-hmm. and this social distancing is quite a new norm, mm-hmm. Which we are adjusting, but I think we are coping well.
Very good. All right, so now yesterday you were announcing the monetary policy decision taken by the bank. Give us highlights of the decision taken and why your committee took that decision.
Thank you very much. Indeed, yes, yesterday we did announce that after our deliberations as the Monetary Policy Committee meeting, mm-hmm. we decided to cut the policy rate by 225 basis points, mm-hmm. To 9.25%. This, if people should know, this is the rate at which we started this program of forward look framework. Mm-hmm. But that's not really what underpinned the decision. Mm-hmm. The decision was underpinned by what was observed. As we have pointed in the past, our decisions are guided by the evidence that mm-hmm. we gather in the economy, the global economy as well, and then we look at what risks we are faced with, mm-hmm. and look at the projections where inflation, which is our main objective, mm-hmm. is headed. Now, in the current circumstances, just from where you started under COVID-19, mm-hmm. I think COVID-19 is a new phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's a pandemic, mm-hmm. like no other pandemic that we have experienced. So the devastating effect mm-hmm. that it has had on human life and the economies is quite far-reaching. Mm-hmm. As of this point, we still don't know in full how much damage has been caused by this pandemic. Mm-hmm. So we took that very, very seriously to see what can we do as a people, as an economy, to fend or protect ourselves against that. Incomes of people have collapsed. Mm-hmm. People are staying home. Business has really stand to still. Mm-hmm. So we thought that we needed to rise to that challenge. Mm-hmm. In spite of the fact that inflation is rising, but we will come to that later on, what factors we see are at play there. Mm-hmm. But we thought that for now, we needed to do something that would help to safeguard the economy, and that's how we came up with that decision. And we have also taken other measures before this, which need to be complemented. So we couldn't do something which will undo mm-hmm. what we had earlier done. For example, we have the 10 billion package that is on offer. Mm-hmm. We have also taken measures in the financial sector to ease the way of doing extending loans. Mm-hmm. We have also taken measures to assist in digitizing mm-hmm. transactions so that we observe social distancing and reduce the chances of people handling cash which may carry the virus. So all these measures are aimed at safeguarding lives and also preserving our livelihoods. So that's the context in which we made the decision that we made yesterday.
Great. So what exactly are the monetary policy objectives?
Put simply, mm-hmm. monetary policy objectives are aimed at price stability. Mm-hmm. Now, by price stability is simply saying that we have to get inflation low and stable. Mm-hmm. Now, low is in our case defined by what the Ministry of Finance gives us the objective. Mm-hmm. You recall in the budget for this year, the minister did announce that our inflation target was going to be in the range of 6 to 8%. So that's what monetary policy is aimed at achieving. So we have to do what we need to do to ensure that the price falls. Now, price here, again, I think it's important to explain because people tend to look at the relative prices, that is individual prices. They say, no, look, you are saying inflation has come down, but yet when I went to the shop, I found that the price of bread or something else has gone up. That's not what inflation is really about. It's the change in the aggregate price level. So I think we have in the past given examples of what that means. Really, that's what we are talking about here, that the rate of change in the aggregate price level. And we are guided here by the Central Statistical Agency, which every month collects information to inform us where the price level is, with using a basket of goods that they constantly do that. But we also do our own survey while waiting for that, because we need some frequent, high frequency information. So every week we do have our officers going out to selected places to check on the same commodities and inform us where it is the direction, and we compare that with what the Central Statistical Agency tells us. So in short, monetary policy objective is to have low and stable inflation. Yes.
All right. So if you have a contribution, if you have a question, please feel free to contribute or to ask a question. The numbers that you can call 226841 and 0978-895-895. 226-841, 0978-895-895. I have with me in the studios the Bank of Zambia Governor, Dr. Denny Kalyalya. All right, so how does the decision your committee took help meet the monetary policy objectives?
At this time, it may be a bit tricky to link directly to what that decision would do to inflation, because others have said, well, with such a big cut, and you actually risking it's fueling inflation. This is where I was saying that I'll come back to this, in that what we have observed in the recent past is that inflation has to a large extent been driven by structural factors, in particular food prices. I think it's no secret that people have complained about high prices of meal across the country. That has been a major driver of inflation. But you also recall that towards the end of last year, or is it beginning of this year, there was an administrative adjustment in the prices of fuel pump prices. Obviously that nudges prices up. And there was also an adjustment in the electricity tariffs. So those were expected obviously to have an impact on the prices. But I think the rationale behind, for example, the adjustment in tariffs is also to address another challenge that we have been facing as a country, which is electricity supply shortfall. So investors were not able to invest because they could not get a return or fair return to their investment. So I think that objective is a sound one, and I think we all appreciate. But in the meantime, it has this other adverse effect. Now, there is what we call the first round effects. The first round effects are not significant because of the weight of that in the food basket, or the basket that CSO, sorry, I'm still used to CSO, the Central Statistical Agency measures. So now we are in that phase where the secondary effects kicked in. So which you see that translating into higher prices of other commodities. But there was another push to that. It's the exchange rate, which depreciated quite considerably. We saw that at the end of the year, we closed year-to-date exchange rate depreciation of close to 19%, but much of that came about in November, December, and we took some measures to address that from the demand side. And we saw that some relative stability did return into the market the first 2 months of this year. But then again, intensified pressures came, such that for the quarter as a whole, we had an average depreciation of 9.6%. But by the end of the quarter, we see that the exchange rate had depreciated by close to 29%. Now, that translates into higher prices of particularly imported commodities. So that has been the driver of inflation. But then when you look back, growth has been coming down of our economy, meaning that we are not producing as much as we ought to be. And that has resulted into higher prices because commodities have become scarce. So from that perspective, we felt that aggregate demand is so constrained such that if we were to raise the policy rate, for example, because inflation at its current level, 15.7%, then would even strangulate the economy to the large extent. So if you will, this is a step back to try to allow growth to take effect, because at the level that growth has been happening last year, the estimate is at 1.9%. But this year, because of COVID-19, we expect the economy to even go into a recession, negative 2.6%. Now, that is a big move. We last saw such a development 20 years ago. Now, that, if it doesn't scare any, I think it's time to realize that the situation is not normal. We have a very extraordinary situation, and we have to do extraordinary things for us to address that issue. So that's the context in which we took the measure that we did. So this is expected to lower the price of money, the interest rate, by those who are borrowing and linked to the policy rate should immediately see a relief of 2.25% to their percentage points to their interest cost. So we are also expecting that in so doing, some activity may be stimulated, and then we can get growth back up again.
Great. In this period of the COVID-19 pandemic, members of the public were expecting the central bank to reduce the monetary policy rate to about 5% or less in arriving at the policy decision. Did your committee took into account what other central banks have been doing in response to the COVID-19?
Yes, very affirmative to that. We constantly look on a daily basis. We look what is going on. But I think, Clyde, it's very important for people also to understand that the context matters. Just because your neighbor is doing something, don't rush into doing something. Understand what is going on. So for us, our decisions are underpinned by the analysis of our economy and what is happening, as I indicated at the beginning. But once you put that into context, then you have to do something which is consistent with your environment. You don't just import an idea and run with it in your own circumstances. Because doing so, you'll be actually making grave mistakes, because you don't know the structures of economies differ. No economies, even if they look alike, are the same. Just like as individuals, we may look alike, but we are different. So that is very important to take into account. So when we look at what is happening, people have said, "Oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Others are doing it." No, we don't just follow. We look at the facts on the ground and then mold our decision in accordance with those facts that we are faced with. Inflation is at 15.7%, the last reading. So if you brought the rate as it is already we are in real terms negative. So 5% is a collapse. You know, remember, inflation is a thief in the night. You know, you are sleeping, your money is losing value. And I think that's what people are complaining about. When you go to the shops, you find that your 1 kwacha can't fetch you much. So that is very important for any reform program to be under control.
All right, so once again, if you want to contribute, you can come through via WhatsApp or WhatsApp line 0978-895-895. You can also call on the same line 226841 and 0978-895-895. Talking about inflation has been rising over a period of time now. What do you think should be done to ensure that inflation is contained?
Very good question. Inflation is driven by several factors. Generally, people can say inflation is driven by a cost push. If the cost of production is high, you are ending up with fewer goods. Then you have too much money chasing too few goods. That's the common 101 that we learn those who have attended economics. But there's also the demand side, which is related to the one of too much money, that when there is too much demand, then you are going to have inflation. But there are also issues of structural nature. I think I have tried to explain here that if the structure of the economy is that you are not able to generate more output, then supply becomes the constraint, and in so doing, it pushes prices. Look now, for example, some of the goods that we consume here, they are imported. Now, with the closure of borders, what has happened? Those goods are not flowing in, which means that those few which are in the shops, the shop owners adjust the price to rationalize the distribution of the same. So, to really contain inflation on a sustainable basis, we have to produce enough food, for example, because food in our basket ranks very high. It's about 57%, if I'm not mistaken. Now, anything that happens in that space, you find that the prices of inflation will go up. So, in short, we need to have high production of food. I think we see our colleagues say in East African market where they produce much of what they eat, inflation is not driven much by the food. 2, the exchange rate plays an important role in our setting, again related to the importation of goods and services. So whenever there is a movement in the exchange rate, particularly depreciation, that translates into high. But how do we address that? We need to address that through diversifying our sources of exports so that we are not affected to the same extent if one product prices go down. Like as it is now, copper tends to be our main export commodity. So whatever happens to copper prices, it affects us. But if we are the diversified source of exports, that could be mitigated. And that's what has been the cry all this in the 7th National Development Plan. We have these sectors which have been identified for stimulating diversification of our economy. So production, exchange, foreign exchange earnings have also to be of a type that is stable. Inflation also has been driven by, for us, when you have fiscal deficits which are unsustainable, if you have debt service and debt levels which are too high, that translates into reduced activities in the domestic economy, and that pushes prices up. So in short, we need to bring what we call in our terminology macroeconomic stability, meaning that we have to have sustainable debt, sustainable fiscal stance, stable and high exports, which means our reserve position is of a decent quantum. So once we have those in place, we should have stable inflation.
There's a question here. They didn't say their name, but it says, kindly ask the doctor the effects on fuel on the economy and how our economy has the highest rate in the southern region. In addition, kindly ask the doctor to clarify their proposal on the functions of the Bank of Zambia in Bill 10.
I see. Okay. I may not be able to go deep into the fuel issue because there is another agency whose primary responsibility is to deal with that. So, for sure, our prices of fuel have been said to be higher than in other parts of the region, for example. Obviously, that is the issue I said that drove prices when the adjustment was made. Because fuel is a commodity which is used widely. If you will, it's what we may call a primary commodity, which is used individually. We came here, we used the fuel. You know, we are doing literally everything you need fuel to move from, let's say, to transport goods and services, to get to places of work you need. So that's the interlinkage which is there. So if the prices of fuel are such that they are high, they translate. You heard me say there's the first round effects, then the second and the third round effects. That's the chain that we look at to see how fuel affects us. But lately, I think we saw at the start of COVID-19 that in other parts of the world, price of fuel actually went down. For first time, we saw in countries like the US, actually you had to you were paid for buying fuel. That is extraordinary because there was not much usage of that fuel. But unfortunately, the way we procure fuel has also something to do with the price at which you set the pump price. So sometimes there's this disconnect between what is happening in the oil industry and what is happening at the local level. So that again is something which the colleagues in the Ministry of Energy and the Energy Regulation Board look at, and they can advise us on that. But that's the connection that there is. Now,
all right. Before you answer that, there's a call. Let's pick up this call. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Dr. Kalyalya.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you. This is Mr. Mulonda from Kite.
Mr. Mulonda, please go ahead with your contribution or question.
Yes, I'd like to find out from the governor, particularly not necessarily a question based on the monetary aspects they deal with, but it's on the fiscal fitness of the country. I want to find out to what extent does the central bank play a fiscal advisory role on the part of government, looking at the unsustainable debt levels that this country has actually reached. And because of that, you would find that to a larger extent, fiscal monetary policies are indirectly affected, such that whatever interventions the central bank tries to do tends to be reactive and not proactive, because when you see a fiscal regime which is probably misdirected or not meeting the objectives overall, you would find that there is that trickle-down effect which begins to affect other aspects of the economy. And to that effect, you find that the central bank now seems to be getting the brunt of the, uncoordinated fiscal aspects that the government may be putting in place. So vis-a-vis, I'm talking about the large debts that we are getting. So I want to find out how the Bank of Zambia tries to coordinate with its counterpart at the Ministry of Finance to see that there's fiscal fitness which talks to the monetary policy, and not where the monetary policies always seem to be reactive because of the mess that is actually there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that question. Before you respond to that question, let's take a short break for global news. We'll be back after a minute or so.
Copperbelt's favorite radio station. Phoenix 89.3 FM.
Welcome back to the program. On the program this morning, I have with me the Bank of Zambia Governor, Dr. Denny Kalyalya. And before we went on a break, there was a question that came through. Yes. All right. What's your response to?
Yeah, actually there were two. There was one earlier, which was the role of the Bank of Zambia in BU10. Just to quickly say that the proposal which came from us was to simply say, why doesn't the Constitution just focus on the primary function of the bank? That doesn't take away the fact that the other functions that we perform, such for example issuance of currency, supervision of banks, are not important. But we thought that the Constitution should be a document which it really focuses on the principles. But we understand also the challenges that we have had as a country, because people feel that if it's not in the Constitution, then it is not as important. So that's how our Constitution document is such a bulk document. But really the point was that we thought that the Constitution should just talk about the primary function of the institution. The others would be spelled out in the subordinate legislation, like the Bank of Zambia Act, the Banking and Financial Services Act, as well as the National Payment System Act. So that's the context. It's not that those functions are being taken away from the bank. No, the answer is the capital NO. They will still be performed by the bank. So that's the context. I hope that helps. Then to the question raised by Mr. Mlonda from Kitwe, yes, and the fiscal fitness. First, I think he has also characterized that you have the fiscal authority and the monetary authority. The bank is in the latter, which is the monetary authority. Now, we have to be careful how we can say something, but really that responsibility lies in the fiscal authorities. That's the separation of functions that we have. Having said that, I think we have been consistent pointing out some of the risks of not having a sustainable fiscal situation. I think if you look at our monetary policy statements, they have made those points very clear. And I think it's fair to say that the Ministry of Finance, the Minister, has also come out in the open, pointing out that the debt level that we have is unsustainable, the fiscal deficits that we have been running are unsustainable. You know, we subscribe to regional groupings where there is a convergence criteria, for example, under SADC, under COMESA, and even under the Association of African Central Banks, where our principals have agreed to certain convergence criteria. For our groups, what we say that fiscal deficit of about 3% of GDP is what is consistent, sustainable. I think you can see the challenge that where the country has faced now with COVID-19. We don't have what we may call fiscal buffers to be able to respond to the crisis, because the fiscal deficit is so high already, the debt service is so high. So where do you get extra money to do? I think these are the kind of risks you run when your fiscal situation is not in a stable situation. I think the minister has labored to point out that. That's why I can say that, I mean, it's not something that is a secret, it's something that has been spoken about. We have spoken about, others have spoken about. We need to bring our fiscal situation to raise the area on about the inflation. That's contained in that. Yes, you mentioned about the coordination. Very true. We need to do a lot more than we are doing now, so that we can be able to tell each other that no, you are stepping a bit out of bounds in terms of what we need to have. Because at the end of the day, all these speak to the economy, and the economy is the people. It's the goods and services that we produce. So we hear what Mr. Mlonda is saying, but I think our advisory role, and when you say advisory, it's advisory. That's what it is. But if you are talking about monetary policy, then we would be able to answer you more directly, because that's in our purview. That's our primary responsibility. So I hope the differentiation in functions, or the separation in functions, is also appreciated.
Now, let's talk about the 10 billion stimulus package. What is the current status on the uptake of the 10 billion stimulus package?
Okay, firstly, just to answer your direct question, then I'll try to explain the context of this 10 billion, because I think it has been given different characteristics. First, the uptake is not as fast. Why? Part of it is to do that this is not free money. So if anyone is going to get money which they borrow, I think you have to look carefully how you are going to repay it. So you look at your business model. Now we have had this lockdown for some of the countries. If your business line involves getting things from other countries, there is that aspect to consider. So before you can actually go to your institution and say, I need some money, because they'll ask you those questions. How are you going to repay it? So we launched this on the 15th of April, which is last month. It's over a month now. So we have had some response. We have 6 banks which have come forward, and about 7 non-bank financial institutions. That's the response. In total, we have approved so far about 1.2 billion kwacha, but we have not dispersed any yet. The reason being that after approval, we want to be satisfied that the funds, the benefits will accrue to the borrowers of that. So the banks and the non-bank financial institutions with applications have been approved have to demonstrate to us that this will happen, because otherwise it won't help matters if the benefits do not flow to the ultimate borrowers of these funds. So now coming to the facility itself, we set up this facility. It's something which we had been, because you recall in 2015 we started raising the policy rate. What that did was to squeeze the economy with the expectation that other policy levers would come in so that we could get growth going, because inflation had shot. But when we did that, there were unintended consequences. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that the liquidity situation in the economy was tightened. So we saw some of the financial service providers, their businesses was strangulated. Some, in fact, even went out of business. Now, this continued later in 2018 actually. We started adjusting backwards the rate so that we could give space. But liquidity constraints continued, and you can see that growth has been coming down. It's just that the rate of deceleration now has been made much faster. So what we pointed to ourselves that, we have these 2 primary mandates. One is price stability, the other is financial system stability. So in our strategic plan for 2020 to 2023, we have 2 focus areas. One is financial system stability, the other is financial inclusion. So, meaning that, yes, we have the objective of price stability. We thought we had brought, and we think, we think we have reasonable handle on that. Prices actually had come down to single-digit levels, and we are within the band. But the other side, which is financial stability, was beginning to heat up. Non-performing loans had gone up quite considerably. Then you have seen also government has been running arrears to suppliers of services and goods. Then there's a new set of arrears of the civil service who have borrowed from the banking system, whose deductions are not remitted. That now creates another pressure for liquidity in the market. The debt service that we have been doing has been siphoning liquidity into the market such that there is no circulation of that money in the economy. So the system has been starved of liquidity. Now come COVID-19, it just worsens the situation. So we looked at what can we do to help the situation. So we invoked our role as supervisors of these institutions to try and deal with that liquidity constraint. That's how we came up with this idea. We looked at what is going on. You asked earlier the question that, don't you look what happens? We do. And looking at that, we have also to do things which are within our means that we are able to do. So that's how we came up with this facility. The channel is the financial service providers who we supervise. That's our role given to us by Parliament, by the Zambian people under the Bank of Zambia Act. So that's what we are invoking here to assist. And that helps the government on the fiscal side, because when we get these people borrow money, they will be able to do business and be able to pay taxes.
All right. Let's pick another call. There's somebody on the line. Good morning.
Good morning to you, the presenter, and good morning to the doctor.
Good morning, sir.
What's your name and where are you calling us from?
Okay, this is Johnson Luo. I'm calling you from within Lusaka.
Johnson, please go ahead with your question.
Well, thank you so much. It's very it's an honor to actually be able to interact, especially with a doctor. I know growing up, we just used to see such people with important roles in our country from a distance. So I'm very happy to call in and pose my question. Coming to my question, I've read, although briefly, the announcement that the Bank of Zambia made regarding the policy rate. And according to that communication, you say you have cut the policy rate by 225 basis points, if I'm not mistaken, in order to mitigate the adverse effects of the coronavirus on the people. My concern, I joined the program a bit late, so please forgive me if I will raise an issue which perhaps others have already raised. My concern and the concern of many people out there is that they would really want to understand how this is going to precisely impact on people of all different economic activities across our nation. Those in formal employment, those in informal employment, and those who are doing other different economic activities. For example, what does this mean? Does it mean that, as people have been speculating, that the lending rates will go down? Say, for example, for an individual like me who's got a loan with one of the commercial banks, does it mean that the rate at which I acquired that loan is going to be adjusted downwards? If so, is this just advisory, or the banks, the commercial banks and other institutions have to comply? It's a must, they have to comply. If it's a must, they have to comply. What measures has the central bank, Bank of Zambia in this case, put in place to ensure that that compliance actually happens and the people benefits from this decision which the central bank has taken? I am aware that in the past there have been pronouncements by the government for certain actions or activities to take place so that the people may be relieved from these effects that we are facing of the coronavirus, but rarely has established business entities taken that advice into consideration. So the key question is to understand if this is mandatory. Commercial banks and other institutions have to comply and make adjustments which are going to reflect the new rates And if it is that they must do so, what has the Bank of Zambia put in place? What mechanism?
All right. I think we got your question. We got your question, Johnson. You've heard his question, right?
Yes.
All right. So what's your quick response to his question?
Yes. Thank you very much, Johnson, also, first of all, for your kind words. Yes, the expectation is that the policy rate has been reduced. Firstly, I think what happens is that the financial institutions, that is the banks and the non-bank financial institutions, they have different types of rates that they apply. Now, there are rates which they will say they are linked to the policy rate. So, quite definitely, immediately that there is an adjustment in the policy rate, that should translate into those rates also adjusted downwards by the same margin, which is 225, which is 2.25 percentage points. I think this has been demonstrated even in the past when you have made adjustments. Banks have advertised that following the adjustment in the policy rate by the Bank of Zambia, the rates that are attached to that are also adjusted accordingly. So that we expect to happen. And in terms of monitoring, we do meet these institutions. We do have an interaction on an ongoing basis, and we will look at who has and who has not adjusted as per provisions of the Banking and Financial Services Act. But let me explain something here, the framework that we have as a country, we don't have fixed interest rates. In other words, as a central bank or the government, it doesn't go that you lend at this fixed rate. Why? It's because we have learned in the past that it hasn't worked. Because for one, if it's a business, every business has risks that confront them. So the lender has to have a better appreciation of the risks that particular business has. So no two businesses have exactly the same type of risk. So the differentiation in the rates that they charge take account of the different risks. Now, the framework also is meant to kind of urge these institutions to look at the policy rate as a reference point for whatever rates they then. But there are distortions in the economy right now. What are those? Some of those, the basic ones, is that you raised the issue of area on the fiscal. I think Mulonda raised that question. Now, if the government is borrowing at a higher rate, clearly that becomes now the base at which the lenders look. Why? Because the government in any setting is a risk-free. In the bank's assessment of risks, the government exposure or lending to government is rated 0. Right? Now, imagine if you can borrow at 28% when there is no risk, how much will you lend to someone who poses a risk? I think that's the challenge, and that's why we are talking about macro stability, so that we can have the free rate to be even lower than the policy rate. Then the policy rate will have significant effect. So that's the framework we're working on. That's why we keep talking about that we have these distortions which we need to address in our economy. So sadly, that's the status of the situation here, that the policy rate is looked at, but is not the binding constraint in terms of the banks, because the banks can get money from elsewhere at a cheaper or even higher rate. Now, when they can invest, they invest in a high return. The government paper, the treasury bills and the bonds fetches more. So why not put it and then just don't do anything else? So that's the the challenge that we have to address as a country, so that the treasury bills, the bonds, should have lower interest. That way, then the policy rate and the lending rate will adjust to that. So I hope, Johnson, understand we have a presentation which we show where these are. In yesterday's presentation was there as well, but it's on our website. You can get it.
All right. We have someone on the line. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you? Good to have the governor on the show.
Thank you. What's your name and where are you calling us from?
My name is Samuel Volya. I'm calling you from Lusaka.
Samuel, please go ahead with your contribution or your question.
Governor Kalyalya, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to talk to the governor, and appreciate the role the central bank is playing to stabilize the economy. I think quite often when the economy is on its knees in this country, we have seen on various occasions the central bank coming up with various measures to stabilize the economy, which is a commendable job. The only problem I have personally as an entrepreneur is the banking sector, which is not supportive to growth. I think on many occasions there have been so many pronouncements on spurring economic growth by supporting various investments. But unfortunately, what happens is that when you approach a bank, they will always ask you whether it's a startup or it's an existing investment. If it's not an existing venture, then they will not fund it, because they don't want to put funds in a new startup project. And so that is a counter to what the central bank is trying to do, and what quite so often from the fiscal side, what they try to also do in terms of spurring economic growth. So how would the central bank intervene? For example, I would start a farm where I would have done a bore, where I would have done cultivation and planted, but I need perhaps just funds to fence off the farm. And then someone comes and says, look, this is a startup project, I want to protect the crop from animals. I want to protect crop from other people that may encroach into my farm. The bank says, no, this is startup business. So this is just one example. There are quite so many other businesses that may have suffered in a similar way. How would the central bank intervene to ensure that what they are standing for is actualized by the commercial banks? Because the mother of all banks want to move the economy in this direction, but those that they superintend over are not doing it. And also the 10 billion that has been promised, which I think I heard the governor said they have not yet disbursed. How is it going to be effectively distributed or provided to would-be borrowers, so that what the central bank is trying to achieve is actualized at the end of the day? Because as we stand with central banks, they are more risk-averse than anybody else. It's normal to be risk-averse, but the extent to which these banks are is quite alarming, and it's not supportive to economic growth. Thank you so much. That's my question and concern.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that question. We have another call. Good morning.
Good morning.
What's your name and where are you calling us from, please?
My name is Haji.
Saji.
I'm calling within Lusaka.
Please go ahead with your contribution or question.
Hello?
Please go ahead with your contribution or question.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello?
Yes.
Please go ahead with your question.
I have a question to ask the governor. Something which is not related to what he was talking about. It's an issue to do with heritage coin. I think you might be aware of a heritage coin issue. I think the court was clear that we should be given our money on and before March last year, and we were only given 53% of the money that was seized by the Bank of Zambia, and up to now we haven't been given the money. But the court was so clear, and we have not heard anything from Bank of Zambia, and we have facts that the money is sitting in on a Bank of Zambia account, which was retrieved from these people. So we want the answers from the Honorable there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your question. All right. Let's get another one, then you can respond to them. Good morning.
Hey, just a minute. Good morning. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you. What's your name and where are you calling us from?
Frederick Chama from within Lusaka.
Frederick, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank the governor for, I think in my history, I've never heard a bank governor coming on radio and receiving phone call to answer questions. This is historical to me. This is commendable. And we should send also other governance institutions like parliament, head of judiciary. You can't stay that side when you claim to be doing functions on behalf of the people. So congratulations, Dr. Kalyalya. Continue with the same spirit. Coming to the question, Dr. Kalyalya, you mentioned something which caught my attention. When you talked about interest rates, you hear even government officials complaining about high interest rates. Now, from your explanation, it is clear that the why we have high interest rates is because of government paper. Government itself decides to borrow at a high rate. So what can be done? Why does government borrow at a high rate and causing high interest rates? And in the same vein, they go on top of the mountain complaining that we have got high interest rates. So what can be done in that regard? Then again, you talked about the fiscal aspect on your colleague, Dr. Ngandu. Dr. Ngandu was on Sunday interview last Sunday. From his words, I don't know if he was just playing with words, he claimed to say, IMF claims that our debt is unsustainable. He didn't say him as Minister of Finance believes that our debt is unsustainable. He said it's IMF who claims, that's why they didn't even give us COVID emergency funds. And this COVID, because economic policy, as far as I'm concerned, I might be a layman, monetary and fiscal, together put together, they form what you call economic policy. So you cannot be going in different directions. So what can be done for you to start, or what is the challenge you think the other guys are not moving in tandem? You seem to be doing more, while the other guys seem to be going in the other direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that question. All right, so your response to those questions that have come through.
Okay. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, looks like it's a gentleman's club. No lady yet has raised any question so far. Thank you, all of you, for your kind words. Let me try to see if I can provide some perspectives on the questions raised. Starting with that raised by Samuel. I think your frustration, is well-founded. We do also recognize that. But you see, we are not in a commandist economy. That's one thing must be appreciated. And we had that situation before. That also didn't serve us well. So I think in 1990-91, we decided as a country to have a different economic structure than was before, because the previous one didn't serve us well. So that's the starting point, that we don't direct people that when I do this, and I must see. So that's the model that we have adopted as a country. Until that changes, I think that must be understood, how the rules of the game are played. So that they said, I think we have seen, and we have also spoken, maybe we don't come out in the open about what someone is talking about, startups not being encouraged to come, because banks would want to see you have a balance sheet or financials going 3 years back to see that you are somebody, a known figure. So that already stands in the way of that kind of activity. But the government had created institutions which could come round that. The Development Bank of Zambia as such institution which could, and it had actually done that. But then along the way, again, we see it being strangled by non-payment of the loans that were extended, and then you find the institution gets into some difficulty. That then creates another bottleneck. So this is where we formed the Credit Reference Bureau as one of the ways to deal with the credit culture, that when you borrow money, you must return the money. Now, banks, by their very nature, they tend to be short-term focused. Why? The answer is simple, is much of the banks they have liabilities which are of a short-term nature. This is the deposits. If you look at the deposit base of the banks, it's more of these demand deposits, which means that individuals who have put money in the bank can go back to the bank anytime to demand that money. So given that, then they cannot lend long, and if they are not paid, the depositor will not be paid. Then you have another problem. And that's why I think they also find it easier for them to put money where they are sure that they will get it back and with the return. And that's where the government paper becomes attractive. So we have a development, the questions, the issues that someone has read, these are the developmental issues that we need to be tackling. What institutions do we have? We have, for example, the government set up the Economic Empowerment Commission to try and do that. There also you run into some challenges. We have had some institutions which tried to be more aggressive. They get into difficulties. So, but that have been said, I think we definitely need to have more kind of discussion here and see what kind of specialized institutions we can have to deal with this developmental issue which he has raised. Because the ones who give that kind of money are venture capitalists who say, no, don't pay me, do what you have to do. When it succeeds, then we'll share in the thing. We don't have that at the moment. And we also don't have Zambians with financial power, financial muscle, who can set up institutions that can lend or set a bank. We have been pleading, can you come forward? Nobody is coming. And some of these, when they go, when we take them over, we find that there's a lot of insider borrowing. When you set up an institution, you think that's your baby you control. So we have a lot of developmental issues to deal with. So I think somewhere I would entreat you to some further conversation. I don't think in this forum I would be able to do justice to his question. But I just wanted to point out that we are not in a space where we direct that you lend to this one and at that rate, or give this one money and not the other one. It's a problem. Now, the 10 billion is coming up again. Is to how we do ensure that it is today. Again, I think I didn't perhaps complete my thoughts or our thoughts on that issue, that what we are trying to address with the 10 billion is the credit, the financial liquidity constraint. Now, we are very alive to the fact that it won't solve all the problems. I think we will be deluding ourselves if we thought that with the 10 billion we can solve each and every financial need that we have in the country. That's the first thing to note. Then how do you rationalize how this goes out? And that's why we are going through established channels which we have control over, in terms of if there is any misbehavior, we can be able to come and say, hey, this money you got and this money you must pay back. So that obviously eliminates some of the would-be beneficiaries. So we need other tools that can fill that gap. 10 billion will not answer all our issues. But it's a start to begin to answer some of our
Still on the 10 billion, how much has been disbursed so far?
No, I did indicate that we have no disbursement yet, but we have some approval because we want to be assured that there is some benefit coming out of that. So this is a new phenomena that we have got. So let's be patient. Let's not look at the cup as being half empty. Let's look at the cup as half full, and let's see how we move. We have had the conversations with the other stakeholders on this, that those who are able to come. Obviously, it's not a facility, since we are passing it through the banks, it's not for players who commingle funds, so to speak, in personal money and business money. But there are non-bank financial institutions who have stepped forward, who want to play a role. So we will encourage those to do and then build on that in the period ahead. Saji, the Lusaka Heritage Coin, yes, you have taken me by surprise because this is not what I thought you could be talking about. But I would just say that the Bank of Zambia, yes, it has the money, but the payment of that money is not dependent on the Bank of Zambia. There are other stakeholders who have the primary role to take. But perhaps what I can say on this one, why don't we take it offline and then you look at the exact bottlenecks to that. But you have taken note of it, and perhaps we can clear the air on what is standing in the way of the disbursements. I hope that will do to Saji for now. Frederick Chama from Lusaka, thank you for your very kind words. I think we are public servants, but I'm honored that you think I did something positive here. Interest rates, yes, interest rates is a price. Inflation is a price. Exchange rate is a price. Now, when these things move, it means the underlying is what is driving that. I think we see in the agricultural sector very commonly. Take tomatoes, for example. When they are off season, the price goes up. When it's the season for them, a lot of it is on the market and it goes down. That's how the law of supply and demand operates. Now, the interest rates equally is the price of money. But you said, why is the government? Because you have to look at what the government needs. Expenditure needs of government are exponential, but the sources of financing is limited. It's taxes. If you exhaust taxes, you have to borrow. Now, it has to be appreciated also where we came from. Infrastructure has been one of our cry as a developing country and all that. So a program to go that route was embarked upon. But while that was going on, your revenue base shrunk. And in that process, then we needed to have a pause to really see where are we going. I think that's where I think the issues have continued, that we have this borrowing, which is taking away. I think His Excellency has even made it very clear in his presented to Parliament. Much of our resources, over 90% of our resources, go into two areas: debt service and wages for the civil service, leaving very little for other activities. So this is how you see that there are these areas. Now, how do you make ends meet, so to speak? That's why now the government has to go back now. Revenues are not sufficient. Then where do you raise that? The external side is not available anymore because your debt is very high. So what happens? You turn to the domestic side, and in so doing, you are popping up the prices. So what we are saying is that this is where we need to say, wait a minute, can we take a closer look? What do we really want to do and adjust that? So it's that adjustment, I think, which we have been talking about, that we need to make, and then we can begin to see that overheating cooling off. It's hard choices. It's not easy. That's why it's not done that easily, because expenditure plans, who you give, is a political decision. It's when you expend the budget. It's not an easy thing. There are so many. If you have 4 areas that you want to spend, and you have only 10 kwacha, for example, how do you decide who gets how much, where to go? So this is the challenge that we have, and we have to face it head on as a country, because outsiders will not make those decisions for us. We have to make those decisions. And when resources are limited, all the more reason why planning where you put the money matters the most.
All right. There have been calls for the central bank to give these funds to financial institutions where government has a stake in, e.g. NATSEV, Development Bank of Zambia, Zanaco, and Indo-Zambia Bank. What's your position on this?
It's a noble call. They are registered institutions, but again, they are not precluded. They can come, but then they have to meet a certain criteria. You see, this money is not free, as I said. They have to show that they can put it to good use, then by putting some collateral up front. Because we don't want tomorrow, when we get a chance, God willing, to appear before you here, you are saying that, you see, that money you gave, you see, it just went to waste. You see, there is that concern as well. So we have to balance these things. So they are very free. They are aware of it. So they come, the conditions are satisfied. We'll be more than happy to give them the money that they need. But they have to earn it, so to speak. Because if we just give them because they are state institutions and then the systems there are not good, this money will not be applied to the need, the purpose for which it is set. So that has to be understood. The conditions for those who can access our website are very clearly outlined. It's a public document. Who can access those funds and under what conditions. We have also made some other adjustments to make it possible for them to restructure existing facilities. That is all the financial service providers. So they are encouraged to do that, but they have to meet the requirements.
Speaking about conditions, others are saying the conditions for accessing the funds are too stringent. Why were the conditions not simplified to allow for more takers to have access to this facility?
It depends on how, you see, we are in different levels. As has been pointed out, you have the big players, you have the small players. This facility is not 10 billion, is not a lot of money given the needs, right? So how do you rationalize how you are going to give that? So this is why we are working through. The central bank has no mechanism. We have 2 branches in the whole country. We don't deal retail. We don't assess the credit worthiness of individuals. But we have institutions which government has allowed us to oversee as channels which go to the people. Those are the channels we are using, and there are laws governing that process. So that's what we are following. Now, we need to have another window, like I said, which can tackle those kinds of other situations. Because if there will be frustration, even that if you have seen in places where you go and they give you some free food, what happens? Stampede, and then in the end, the intended people don't even get anything. So criteria of access is inevitable when you have any limited amount of resources. We have tried as much as possible to accommodate different settings. We have said that if you have a loan portfolio, for example, which is performing, you can pledge that as collateral, so that now we are also looking to the recovery of that from there. So we have also introduced movable collateral is also, but remember, at the end of the day, someone has to assess you to say that yes, you are good for the money. If that yes doesn't come, then we have a challenge. But again, I come to the point that this is a start. We have put this. Can we do something instead of saying there's nothing? I think there's a tendency among us to say, whenever you're confronted with it, if I give you bread, you start saying, where's the tea? Instead of just saying, oh, thank you for the bread, and look for the tea yourself. This is part of our problem. When you say, you start looking for what is not there. But what do we have? Why can't we start from there? I say that let's look at the cup as half full rather than as half empty. But we will not resolve issues by wanting to have all the factors that are in our favor there. I think that must be clear to all of us.
All right. Before we take a break, there's a question here from Kapalu. Kapalu is asking, what is the procedure for businesses to access the 10 billion stimulus package? Is it okay for the Bank of Zambia to zero rates interest rates for the same stimulus package, since it will take time for business to get back to normalcy? That's those two questions from Kapalu. So we'll take a short break. When we come back, maybe you can respond to those questions.
Phoenix FM.
You are listening to the Bank of Zambia radio program, and my guest this morning, Dr. Denny Kalyalya, who is the governor of the Bank of Zambia. Welcome back to the program, Doc.
Thank you.
All right, so I paused the question before we went on a break from Kapalu. Your quick response to...
Yes, please. He was asking about the procedure for accessing the 10 billion. He is going to the institutions that are under our supervision. That is the banks or the non-bank institutions. If he has access to the Bank of Zambia website, we have the names of the institutions, and from time to time also we do publicize the names of the institutions that are regulated by the Bank of Zambia. So that's the channel for accessing these funds. It's the institutions that we supervise. Then he also asked about why don't we make the interest zero? Again, I think I did explain that this is not a free facility. It's a facility which is meant to address the liquidity challenges, and we are trying to help through the banks so that they can continue to play their role of intermediating. Now, there are some flexibilities we have put into the facility. For one, the interest for the first year is zero. I mean, it's not zero, it's you will not pay interest. There is a moratorium. They will accrue it and pay after 1 year. So the facilities are also range from 1 year to 5 years. If you are in the sectors that are designated or identified as priority sectors, namely agriculture, energy, tourism, and then you can go to 5 years. But we have also say that they can pay the interest 1 year and then so that's the part of the benefit we would want to see passed on to the borrowers of those funds, that you don't be asked to pay interest up front, for example, be given the chance because of the very issues that he has raised, that the situation is difficult for everybody, so to give that flexibility. We have also introduced some other arrangements where the collateral that is provided can be assessed over a 5-year period instead of 1 year, which gives some flexibility. So there are some things that perhaps people need to acquaint themselves, and that's why I think we have embarked on a radio program here for the next 13 weeks. So some of the things that we will not be able to cover here, they can be raised. My colleagues will be coming here to address those. Hopefully with that kind of window, many of these questions will be answered, but more importantly, access to the facility will have been made, and then we really begin to address what we are trying to address on the ground, which is economic activity.
All right, as we come to the end of the program, your concluding remarks.
Yeah. Thank you very much. First of all, let me just correct myself. I think I was I had given the Zambia Statistics Agency a new name. I think my mind was still fixated to Central Statistical Office. So the correct name is Zambia Statistics Agency. So my apologies to my colleagues, it wasn't intentional. Now, I just want to say thank you to Radio Phoenix for giving us this opportunity to share this information on the role of the bank. The Bank of Zambia is a public institution, and after the 2016 constitution is a creature of the constitution. So it's a national institution, and we are there to serve the members of the public, but there are channels through which we serve. So we thought that perhaps we need to come out and be able to share some of the things that people may not be quite familiar with. So we hope that this interaction will bridge that gap. Two, I'm also grateful for the questions that were raised and the soundness of the questions that were raised and the context in which they were raised. You can see that people really want to know and do something to equip themselves. So part of doing what we are doing is to empower individuals with the information. Because when you go to the banks, for example, we recognize that negotiations, although we say negotiate, they are not on the level playing field. You see, people, they will borrow because they are under pressure, and sometimes they don't even read the finer details of the conditions, and only become aware of when it's time to pay back that no, but I didn't. And when they are reminded that you signed, they get surprised. So part of this whole process is to give you that information so that you can negotiate reasonably and be aware of what you are getting into before you get into it. So on the 10 billion facility is also a step to try and bridge. It has not been done. I think a long time the Bank of Zambia used to do credit guarantees, but that was discontinued because of abuses which were there. So we haven't done this as an institution. So we are doing this because the situation demands that we do something. So each one of us has to do something. So as an institution, we have stepped forward to do something. So each stakeholder also must do something. We have reduced the policy rate to give some relief along with the other measures that have been taken by our institution, by the government at large. All those are aimed at saving life and saving livelihoods. 2020 is a very difficult year. So any helping hand that we can have is very important. As I say, a journey of 1,000 miles or kilometers starts with the first step. So recognize that this is a first step, but we can improve on it. If it works well, we'll see where the bottlenecks. But if we just keep talking around it, the problem is getting deeper. When you move around, which I try to do like other people, the situation is quite tough. We need economic activity to start going. That's what is going to save our lives. So this, to us, is something we appreciate very, very much, that we have this opportunity to reach out directly to the members of the public and the business community. We have the opportunity to talk to those organized groups, but we don't reach to everybody who is out there. And sometimes information which is passed through, there are some variations which are made along the way. By the time it reaches the final destination, distortion is fitted into that. So thank you once again for this opportunity. we look forward to continued interaction on this forum and the other fora as well. So thank you. Good morning.
Once again, thank you so much, Governor. That's the program for today. I had with me Dr. Denny Kalyalya, who is the Governor, Bank of Zambia. Until next week at the same time, stay tuned to Phoenix FM.